So, this was a few years ago when I was living alone in this tiny one bedroom apartment. It was my first time living by myself, and I was both excited and a bit nervous about it. You know how it is, having the place all to yourself, but also being completely responsible for everything. I had a few friends over the first weekend I moved in, but once they left, it was just me and this quiet, creaky apartment. It was a Friday night, and I had just finished a long week at work. I was looking forward to just chilling out, maybe watching some Netflix and not worrying about anything. I ordered some takeout, lit a few candles to set the mood, because why not, and settled on the couch with my food. It was a pretty chill evening, quiet, just the way I wanted it. Around 9 p.m., I started hearing this faint noise. At first I thought it was just the wind, or maybe the neighbors. It was kind of a tapping sound, very soft, almost like it was coming from the walls. I ignored it at first, thinking it was nothing, but it kept happening. It was like someone tapping their fingernails against a hard surface, just slow and steady. I paused the show I was watching and sat there, listening. The tapping seemed to stop whenever I paid attention to it, so I brushed it off and tried to get back to my show. But every few minutes, it would start up again. It was coming from the wall behind the TV, which was weird because that wall faced the hallway outside my apartment. I thought maybe it was just the building settling or some pipes making noise. Old buildings do that, right? I tried to ignore it, but it was starting to get on my nerves. It felt like the sound was just getting louder, more insistent, like it wanted my attention. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I got up and went to the wall, pressing my ear against it to see if I could hear anything else. The tapping stopped as soon as I did that, and all I could hear was the muffled sound of people talking in the hallway. I went back to the couch, feeling a bit silly. Maybe I was just imagining things. I had been stressed out lately, and my mind was probably playing tricks on me. I decided to just ignore it and go to bed early. I went through my usual routine, double checking that the door was locked and the windows were closed. My apartment was on the second floor, so it's not like someone could just climb in, but still, I wanted to be sure. I got into bed, turned off the lights, and tried to relax. It must have been around midnight when I woke up to this strange sound. It was like a soft scraping noise, like something being dragged across the floor. I sat up in bed, my heart racing, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It sounded like it was right outside my bedroom door. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, pointing it toward the door. The noise stopped immediately, and everything went dead silent. I sat there, holding my breath, listening for any other sounds. Nothing. Just the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I got up, my heart pounding, and slowly crept toward the door. I had no idea what I was expecting to find, but I had to know. I opened the door crack and peeked into the hallway. It was empty. I opened the door wider and stepped into the hallway, shining the light around. The apartment was completely still, just the way I had left it. I went into the living room, checked the kitchen, even looked in the bathroom, but there was nothing. No sign of anyone or anything that could have made that noise. I went back to my room, feeling this cold, creeping fear in the pit of my stomach. I didn't know what to think. I tried to go back to sleep, but every little noise made me jump. The building creaked and groaned like it always did, but now every sound felt like a threat. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep out of sheer exhaustion. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I kept going over it in my head, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. I convinced myself that it was nothing, maybe just my mind playing tricks on me because I was alone. I went about my day, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling that was gnawing at me. That night, I decided to stay up late, just to see if it would happen again. I didn't want to go to bed and be stuck lying there, listening to every little sound. I made myself a cup of tea, grabbed a blanket, and settled on the couch with a book. Around 1 a.m., I started to hear the tapping again. This time, it was coming from the kitchen. I put my book down and listened, my heart starting to race. The tapping was steady, rhythmic, like someone knocking lightly on the counter. I got up, clutching my phone like it was some kind of weapon, and walked to the kitchen. The tapping stopped as soon as I stepped into the room. I turned on the light and looked around, but everything was normal. The dishes were still in the sink from dinner, the window was closed, and the door was locked. I stood there for a minute, trying to catch my breath. I was really starting to freak out. I went back to the living room and sat on the couch, trying to calm myself down. I kept telling myself it was nothing, maybe just the pipes or something, but it didn't help. I felt like I was being watched, like there was something just out of sight, waiting for me to let my guard down. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I started to drift off, I would hear the tapping again. It moved around the apartment, from the kitchen to the living room to the hallway outside my bedroom. It was like it was taunting me, daring me to find it. The next morning, I called my friend and told them what was going on. They offered to come over and stay the night with me, just to make sure everything was okay. I was so relieved that I almost cried. I didn't want to be alone in that apartment another night. They came over that evening, and we stayed up late, talking and watching movies. I was still on edge, but having someone else there made me feel a little safer. We didn't hear any noises that night, and I started to think that maybe it was just my imagination after all. The next day, my friend had to leave, and I was alone again. I spent most of the day out trying to avoid going back to the apartment, but eventually, I had to go home. As soon as I walked in, I felt that same heaviness in the air, like the apartment was holding its breath. I went through my usual routine, double-checking all the locks and windows before going to bed. I lay there in the dark, listening for any sound, my heart pounding in my chest. For a while, everything was quiet. I started to relax, thinking maybe it was finally over. But then, just as I was drifting off, I heard it again. The tapping, louder this time, more urgent. It was coming from inside my room, from the closet. I sat up, my heart racing, and turned on the light. The tapping stopped as soon as the light came on. I stared at the closet door, feeling this cold, creeping fear wash over me. I didn't know what to do. I just sat there, holding my breath, waiting for something to happen. I got up, my hands shaking, and walked to the closet. I reached out and slowly opened the door. My clothes were hanging there, just like always, nothing out of place. I pushed them aside, looking for anything that could have made the noise, but there was nothing, just an empty closet. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't understand what was happening. It was like the apartment was playing tricks on me, like it was trying to mess with my head. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay there, listening, waiting for the tapping to start again. But it didn't. The apartment was dead silent, and that was almost worse than the noise itself. I stayed at a friend's place the next night. I couldn't handle being alone in that apartment anymore. I didn't tell them everything that had happened. I didn't want them to think I was crazy, but I needed to get out of there. When I finally went back to the apartment a few days later, everything seemed normal. The tapping had stopped, and the apartment felt different, like whatever had been there was gone. I still don't know what it was. Maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe there was something in the walls or the pipes, but I'll never forget that tapping sound, or the feeling that I wasn't alone. Even now, whenever I'm alone in the apartment, I can't help but listen for it, that faint tapping that made my skin crawl. It hasn't come back, but the memory of it is enough to make me keep the lights on at night. There was this one weekend where my parents decided to go on a little getaway, leaving me home alone. Not a big deal, right? I was used to it. I was 21 and had spent plenty of nights by myself. Usually it was kind of nice having the place to myself. I'd order takeout, watch some movies, maybe invite a couple of friends over. Just chill, you know? That Saturday started off pretty normal. I slept in, made some breakfast, and spent most of the day just lounging around in my pajamas, binge watching a new series on Netflix. I remember thinking how quiet the house was without my parents around. It was kind of eerie, but in a good way. Peaceful. I wasn't expecting anything weird to happen. It was just going to be another lazy, uneventful day. By evening, I got a bit bored. I decided to order a pizza since I didn't feel like cooking. So I placed an order and went back to watching TV while I waited for it to arrive. The delivery guy showed up about 30 minutes later. I grabbed the pizza, paid him, and locked the door behind me. Just the usual routine. I ate dinner, watched some more TV, and around 9 p.m., I decided to take a shower and maybe get into bed early. The house was still quiet, and I didn't really think much of it. After my shower, I put on some comfy clothes, grabbed a glass of water from the kitchen, and went back to my room. I figured I'd just watch a movie in bed until I fell asleep, but as I was settling in, I heard a noise. It was faint, like a soft thump coming from somewhere downstairs. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, or maybe the wind knocking something over outside. It was an old house, and it made noises like that all the time. I tried to ignore it and focused on picking a movie. A few minutes later, I heard it again. This time, it was louder, like something heavy being moved across the floor. My heart skipped a beat, and I paused the movie, sitting up in bed to listen more closely. I told myself it was probably nothing, maybe just the house creaking or something. But then I heard another noise, like a shuffle, followed by what sounded like footsteps. Now my room is on the second floor, and the sound was definitely coming from downstairs. I felt a chill run down my spine, and my mind started racing. Was someone in the house? I tried to think if I'd locked the door after the pizza guy left, and I was pretty sure I had. But what if I hadn't? I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, slowly getting out of bed. I didn't want to freak out over nothing, but I had to know what was going on. So I tiptoed to my bedroom door and opened it just a crack. I listened, holding my breath, trying to hear any sound from downstairs. Everything was silent. I couldn't hear the footsteps anymore, just the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Maybe I was just imagining things. I mean, I've been watching a lot of horror movies lately, and they were probably messing with my head. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I needed to make sure the house was empty so I could go to sleep without freaking out. So, I grabbed a baseball bat from my closet, not because I thought I'd need it, but just for some peace of mind, and started making my way downstairs. As I stepped into the hallway, I felt like every creak of the floorboards was deafening. My heart was pounding, and I had to keep telling myself to stay calm. I reached the top of the stairs and looked down into the dark living room. Nothing seemed out of place, but it was hard to tell in the dim light. I slowly descended the stairs, gripping the bat tightly. The closer I got to the bottom, the more convinced I was that I was just being paranoid. There was probably nothing to worry about. But then, as I reached the last step, I heard it again. A faint creak, like someone stepping on a loose floorboard in the kitchen. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I turned toward the kitchen, the beam of my phone's flashlight cutting through the darkness. The kitchen was just around the corner, and I couldn't see anything from where I was standing. I held my breath, listening, but I didn't hear anything else. I knew I had to check it out, even though every instinct was screaming at me to just run back upstairs and lock myself in my room. But I needed to know. I needed to make sure I was alone in the house. So I crept around the corner and shined my light into the kitchen. At first, everything looked normal. The counters were clear, the chairs were pushed in, and there was no sign of anything or anyone out of place. I let out a shaky breath, feeling a bit foolish for scaring myself like that. But then, just as I was about to turn around and go back upstairs, I saw it. The back door. It was open. Not wide open, but just enough to make me stop in my tracks. I knew for a fact that I'd locked that door earlier. I'd checked it when I grabbed the pizza, and I always double-check before I go to bed. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Had I just forgotten to lock it? Or had someone opened it while I was upstairs? I walked over to the door, my hands trembling as I pushed it closed and locked it. I stood there for a moment, staring at the lock, trying to calm myself down. That's when I heard the noise again. This time, it was right behind me. A soft, almost inaudible rustling sound, like the fabric brushing against fabric. I spun around, the flashlight shaking in my hand, but there was nothing there. Just the empty kitchen and the dark hallway leading back to the living room. I felt a surge of panic rising in my chest. Was someone in the house with me? I started backing away toward the stairs, keeping my eyes fixed on the hallway, expecting something to jump out at any moment, but nothing happened. Everything was silent again. I made my way back upstairs, my legs feeling like jelly. I went straight to my room and locked the door, my mind racing with all the possibilities of what could be going on. I tried to convince myself that maybe I'd just forgotten to lock the back door, that maybe the noise was just the wind or something. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I grabbed my phone and called my best friend, trying to keep my voice steady as I told her what was happening. She told me to call the police, but I hesitated. What if it was nothing? What if they came and found no one, and I just ended up looking like a paranoid idiot? But as I sat there, gripping the baseball bat and listening for any sound outside my room, I knew I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. So I called the police and told them I thought someone was in my house. They said they'd send someone over right away and told me to stay in my room until they got there. Those were probably the longest 15 minutes of my life. I sat on my bed, my eyes glued to the door, every creak of the house making me jump. I felt like I was going to throw up from the fear and the adrenaline. Finally, I heard sirens in the distance, and a few moments later, the flashing lights of a police car lit up my bedroom window. I ran to the window and saw two officers getting out of the car, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they approached the front door. I ran downstairs to let them in, almost tripping over my own feet in my hurry. They asked me to stay in the living room while they searched the house. I watched as they checked every room, every closet, even the attic. When they came back downstairs, they told me they didn't find anyone. No signs of forced entry, no evidence that anyone had been in the house besides me. I felt a mixture of relief and embarrassment. Relief that there was no intruder, but also embarrassment that I'd called the police for what seemed like nothing. They were nice about it though, saying it was better to be safe than sorry. They took a quick report and left after making sure I felt okay. After they left, I went back upstairs to my room, still feeling on edge. I locked my bedroom door and crawled into bed, but I knew I wasn't going to sleep much that night. I kept thinking about the back door, about how it had been open when I was sure I'd locked it, and the noises I'd heard, the footsteps and the rustling sound, those weren't just in my head. I never figured out what really happened that night. Maybe I just got spooked being home alone. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me, or maybe there really was someone there who got away before the police arrived. I guess I'll never know for sure. But even now, whenever I'm home alone, I make sure to double check all the locks and keep a baseball bat within reach, just in case. So this happened a few years ago when I was still living in my old apartment. It was one of those older buildings with a lot of history, you know? High ceilings, creaky floors, the kind of place that has a lot of character but also makes a lot of weird noises at night. I was living there with two roommates, but they both happened to be out of town for the weekend. I thought it was a great opportunity to just have some downtime by myself, get some work done, maybe binge watch a new show. The first night alone was fine. I ordered some pizza, watched a movie, and just chilled out. I went to bed around midnight, and the apartment was so quiet, like unusually quiet. Usually I could hear my roommates moving around, or the neighbors upstairs, or even just the hum of the city outside. But that night, it felt like everything was on mute. I didn't think much of it, figured it was just because it was late and everyone was probably asleep. I woke up around 2 a.m. to this weird sound. At first I couldn't quite place what it was. It was this kind of soft, rustling noise, like fabric being moved around. I lay there in bed, half asleep, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It sounded like it was coming from the living room, which was just down the hall from my bedroom. I sat up and listened for a minute. The sound stopped, so I thought maybe I had imagined it. I was about to lie back down when I heard it again. This time it was louder and more distinct. It sounded like someone was going through the stuff on the coffee table. I felt my heart start to race. There was no way someone could be in the apartment. I had locked the door and the windows were all closed, but the sound was so clear, it was like it was right there in the room with me. I got up as quietly as I could and grabbed my phone. I didn't want to turn on the flashlight just yet. I didn't want to give away that I was awake and knew something was going on. I crept to my bedroom door and slowly opened it, just a crack, enough to peek into the hallway. The living room was dark, but I could make out the shape of the furniture. I listened, holding my breath, but the rustling had stopped again. I waited there for what felt like forever, just listening to the silence. I was about to close the door and go back to bed when I heard a different noise. It was a creak, like someone stepping on a loose floorboard. My stomach dropped. I forced myself to stay calm. I had to figure out what was going on. I opened the door a bit wider and stepped into the hallway. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my hands were shaking, but I kept moving. I took a few steps toward the living room, and that's when I heard it again. The rustling, louder this time, more frantic. It was definitely coming from the living room. I stopped in my tracks, my mind racing. I thought about calling the police, but I didn't want to freak out if it turned out to be nothing. Maybe it was an animal that got in somehow. like a raccoon or something. I took a deep breath and turned on my phone's flashlight, pointing it toward the living room. There was nothing there. No animal, no intruder, nothing. Just the couch, the coffee table, and a bunch of books and magazines scattered around. I stepped closer, shining the light around the room, trying to see if anything was out of place. Everything looked normal, except for the fact that some of the books on the coffee table were knocked over, like they had been pushed aside. I walked over to the table, my heart still racing. I picked up the books and put them back in place, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I didn't see any signs of an animal or anything that could have made the noise. I stood there for a few more minutes, just listening, but the apartment was silent again. I went back to my room and closed the door, locking it behind me. I got back into bed, but I didn't turn off the light. I just sat there, staring at the door, listening for any more sounds. I must have stayed like that for over an hour before I finally started to relax. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe a draft knocked the books over or something. I finally managed to fall back asleep, but it wasn't a restful sleep. I kept waking up every hour or so, just to make sure everything was still okay. When morning finally came, I felt exhausted. I tried to shake it off and go about my day, but I couldn't get that noise out of my head. It was so clear, so real. I spent the day out of the apartment trying to distract myself. I went to a coffee shop, ran some errands, just anything to avoid going back to that place. But eventually I had to go back. I couldn't stay out all night, and besides, I kept telling myself I was being ridiculous. There was nothing in the apartment, just my imagination playing tricks on me. That night I went to bed early, hoping to just sleep through whatever it was. I left the hallway light on though, just in case. I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone when I heard it again. The same rustling noise from the night before, but this time, it was coming from my room. I froze, my eyes darting around the room. The sound was coming from the closet. It sounded like something was moving around in there, shifting the clothes around. My heart started pounding in my chest, and I felt this cold sweat break out all over my body. I wanted to get up and open the closet door, but I was too scared to move. I lay there, holding my breath, listening to the sound. It was so distinct, so real. I could hear hangers clinking together, fabric rustling, like someone was in there going through my stuff. I thought about calling out, but the words got stuck in my throat. I didn't want to make a sound. Didn't want to let whatever was in there know I was awake. I don't know how long I lay there, just listening. Eventually, the sound stopped, and the room went silent again. I waited for a few minutes, my heart pounding in my ears, before I finally forced myself to get up. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, pointing it at the closet. I stood there for a moment, my hand on the doorknob, trying to work up the courage to open it. Finally, I took a deep breath and yanked the door open. I shone the light inside, half expecting to see someone standing there, but there was nothing. Just my clothes hanging neatly on the rack, undisturbed. I checked through the closet, moving clothes around, looking for anything that could have made the noise, but there was nothing there. Everything was in its place, just like I had left it. I felt this mix of relief and confusion wash over me. I didn't know whether to feel relieved that there was nothing there, or freaked out because I was sure I had heard something. I closed the closet door and went back to bed, but I didn't sleep much that night. I kept hearing noises, little creaks and groans, like the apartment was alive. I kept telling myself it was just the building settling, just my imagination, but it didn't help. I felt like I was being watched, like there was something in the apartment with me. The next morning, I woke up to a strange feeling in the pit of my stomach. I didn't want to be in that apartment anymore, but I didn't have anywhere else to go. I went about my day, trying to act normal, but I couldn't shake this feeling of unease. I felt jumpy, paranoid, like I was constantly on edge. That night, I went to bed with the lights on again, hoping it would help me feel safer. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to every little sound. Around 1 a.m., I heard it again, the rustling, coming from the living room this time. I sat up, my heart pounding. I didn't want to go check, but I knew I couldn't just ignore it. I grabbed my phone and got up, walking slowly toward the living room. The sound was louder now, like someone was moving things around. I turned on the flashlight and pointed it into the room. As soon as the light hit the room, the noise stopped. I walked over to the coffee table and shone the light around, but there was nothing there. I stood there, trying to make sense of what was happening. I didn't understand how there could be all this noise and nothing to explain it. I checked the windows, the front door, everything was locked. There was no way anyone could have gotten in. I went back to my room, but I didn't sleep. I just sat there on the bed, staring at the door, waiting for something to happen. I felt like I was going crazy, like my mind was playing tricks on me. The next day, my roommates came back, and I told them what had happened. They kind of laughed it off, saying it was probably just the building settling or maybe a mouse in the walls. I wanted to believe them, but I knew what I had heard. It was real, and it was terrifying. After that weekend, I never felt the same in that apartment. Even when my roommates were there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I always felt like I was being watched, like there was something lurking just out of sight. I started sleeping with the lights on all the time, and I avoided being alone there as much as possible. To this day, I still don't know what it was. Maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe there was something in that apartment, something that didn't want to be seen. All I know is that I've never been so scared in my life, and I hope I never have to experience anything like that again.